What is up, y'all? Welcome back to the Profit and Prosper podcast, the podcast where you will learn how to pay yourself a six-figure paycheck from your business without having to sacrifice your life today. So I'm a little bit on vacay mode because I'm in the middle of taking my month off, but I do still have this really great podcast interview series coming up. I will be interviewing over the next couple weeks a couple of the women that I personally have worked with in different areas of marketing and sales. As I've grown my businesses from Young & Co. and over on the coaching side, they're some of the women who I have found to be the best of the best at what they do. And so I asked them to come onto the podcast and drop some of their knowledge bombs on all of us. So today we have Kathy Dixon, who is the founder and CEO of Oh Yes Communications. Kathy and her team actually did a messaging workshop for Young & Co. last year, and then that turned into a whole rebrand of our whole business over there. This was something that I did as I was really trying to pull myself out of the branding for that business and turn it into more of a business brand rather than a personal brand. They helped us work through that. And honestly, Kathy is probably one of the best people I have ever come across in marketing when it comes to being able to tell your story and get your messaging down and have branding that reflects the person and the business that you want to have. In this interview, we talked about everything from what actually is messaging, how to level up your messaging, some of her best tips that she has for how you can refine your own messaging and branding to be a better reflection of what you want. She also gave us some really good examples of clients that she's had, including me, mistakes that she's seen and ways that she's seen their messaging shift so that you can take those lessons learned and apply them to your own business. So I really hope you enjoyed this interview. So let's jump in. Kathy, I'm so excited to have you on, and I can't wait to chat about all things messaging, branding, and beyond that I know we're going to touch on. So thanks for being here.
I'm so happy to be here today, Sarah. Thanks for inviting me on.
Tell me first and foremost, of course, your background and how did you get started in your business and how did it grow? Just kind of give us the high level overview of your story.
Well, I feel like my story actually goes back all the way back to my childhood. My parents were immigrants to this country from Colombia. I'm first generation, oldest daughter of three. Growing up, I got a front row view at what it looks like to iterate in your career, both from just opportunity to skill sets that you have. And so watching my dad more specifically be a serial entrepreneur as I got older sort of normalized for me, trying something, dreaming, innovating, failing, and then rebuilding all over again. So, grew up, went the traditional route, went to college, and then first job out of college, pretty quickly on, it lost its sparkle and delight for me. I thought to myself, really young, 24, I'm like, this can't possibly be all that I have to look forward to. I'm sitting in a hallway with no windows. Someone else is taking credit for my work. This sucks. And I think sometimes when you're, the world has a way, life has a way of just working out for you. A month before my wedding, the contract that I was on didn't renew and I was out of a job. I was relieved on one hand, right? But then you're also out of a job. So I went home that night and my husband, almost husband, now husband at the time, he said to me, well, why don't you just do your own thing? And I said, who would hire somebody this young with no background in business? But it was just enough to get the wheels turning. The very next week, I went out and bought $3,000 in video equipment because that was my background. I started as a video producer, and my father, before he passed away, was an anchor for international media. So I grew up in that world of TV and lights and news and political drama, a lot like, nowadays, nothing's changed. That was enough to get started. While building the business, you're hustling on the side. I was serving tables and opening the boxing gym around the corner and, all the things that it takes to start a business at times. Here we are 11 years later. And so in media, my job was to interview people and make sure that I was telling the best parts of their story and then directing crews to film the story in a way that really brought the emotion out. My goal was to bring emotions out always for people while watching it in 2-minute, very succinct 2-minute stories. And so you can see how that quickly spirals into messaging and marketing and websites and just being able to tell a clean story. And so at a very high level, that's sort of a really fast forward without all the highs and lows of what it's been like to start the business.
Well, and now you have Oh Yes Communications and you're building your team and you're working with bigger and bigger clients and having a really great impact. And honestly, I've said this to you before, I've worked with, I don't know how many different like marketing agencies, consultants, whatever. I think that out of everybody, you're probably the best at taking my crazy brain that I have and somehow translating it into like what I really mean to say in a way that like resonates with people, which is why I wanted to have you on.
It makes a lot of sense to me. So if my brain is equally as busy as yours, and I am completely tracking. You make a whole lot of sense, actually, Sarah.
Well, I try. I was thinking about all the messaging mistakes that I've seen people make. Let's say you're working with a new client and doing your whole messaging session and rebranding session. What is the biggest mistake that you see people making when it comes to the way that they convey their brand and their message?
If I stop to think about messaging mistakes and what's high up there and what I see, it's almost like a lack of definition is what I see. We're using too many words with too many different meanings, with too many different intensities. I think part of the exercise of messaging is, I mean, sort of being cutesy, but like figuring out your flavor, right? Is your brand bold? Is your brand funny? Is your brand kind of spicy and looking to stir the pot? It's starting there. It's figuring out what the culture of your company is, because I really believe that when you start there, it dictates everything. It dictates how your team operates, who you hire, and then on the other side of that, the client experience and how you deliver that client experience. So I would say if I had to sort of pick one thing, is it's just the verbiage is lukewarm. I can't quite get a grasp for who you are, what you stand for, and if I like you, honestly. That's sort of what we're trying to do at the end of the day, right?
We hired you guys when I was like, I need to take myself out of the brand. I need to make more of a, not corporate, because I don't want to have corporate vibes, but a company brand and just take me out of it. So how do you differentiate like somebody getting to know me versus getting to know the business when the business was and is, you know, for so long it's been like wrapped up around me?
Almost like separating the two is what you're saying, separating the business owner from
like how do you share the flavor that you have if it's my flavor versus what's the business's flavor? Like how do you even figure out what the difference is?
I don't know that at this size and stage that they're actually too different. And I think it's how we communicate that flavor in a way that feels this is who I am and how I do things, and making it really personalized and making it more mission impact oriented in a way that your team can get on board, right? Part of our job as a CEO is to get that buy-in from team members and being able to really succinctly communicate what it is that we appreciate in our workforce. And so part of the exercise that we did with you, which we do in all our messaging workshops, is figuring out historically up until this point, what has worked really well for your company. We will run you through a series of questions and exercises that really help us identify almost groupings and pairings of words. And so once we have, we define what these groups are, and we set a cap amount, no more than 6 or 7 groups at most. Let's give an example. The word integrity for one business can have a completely different meaning for another business. And so then it's like going the 2 steps further, right? So we've identified that this is sort of an overarching value for the company, but then I need you to then explain to me and give me some concrete examples of how your team or you have done this to really help me understand what this word means in practice. It's from taking concept and then moving it to application. And I think that's where things get really powerful, right? Conceptually, we can all understand what a word means, but then when you see it in action, that's again, that buy-in, that excitement, that buzz that you're like, oh, that's what I'm about that. I want to be with that brand.
It's like the Young & Co. one that we did, right? Like if you can think back to almost a year ago, sitting down like,
oh gosh, a year ago already.
Like what's a tangible example of like taking that, I don't even remember like the words that we had, like the trust, the partnership and all of that, and like turning it into like something with more flavor to it.
So I will say, and you've given me full permission to share all the things here. Okay. Yeah. So I'm not putting you on blast. One of the things that I walked away with from your messaging workshop, and I always walk away with a feeling of some sort that comes from the CEO or from the team. For you, one of the things that surprised me was how bold you are. And I don't know that I had gotten that. I knew that you were smart. I knew that you could like talk circles around people and you were really looking to disrupt how things were done in your industry. But there was a level of boldness to you of like, you weren't interested in impressing people. You weren't interested in like being even likable. You were really passionate about what you were doing and who you were influencing. And I think that was missing from your brand. When we figured that out, then we were able to align the words appropriately, right? So impact is much stronger than I want to make a change in the world. Being
Right.
your partner is much stronger of a word than I want to help you, right? And so we then had to match the intensity of the words that we were choosing with the intensity that we got from you and the team that were on the call to make sure that we were in alignment. And then from there, and this is really a philosophy that makes me sometimes not so likable in my field, is I believe that messaging has to come before branding, before the pretty, before the logos and the fonts and the typography and all the fun stuff. I mean, that is fun stuff and it's exciting to work on that. Your messaging will actually influence that second portion, right? So when we finished your messaging workshop and then we looked at your branding was very feminine. The pinks and the taupes and it worked for a period of time. But this new Sarah, this 2.0, has some experience under her belt now and is looking to create some separation between herself and the brand. It won't appeal to the audiences you're looking to appeal to. So then a rebrand came into the conversation, right? And we chose colors that were bolder, even geometric patterns that were bolder, but still fun, because there's a levity to your personality as well that's really easy to be around. That's part of like that experimentation and cocktail almost on our end, where it's like, how do we craft the perfect brand for this person? And what we do for you and your industry, we could have an exact, same firm that does all the same services, and then they're completely different than you, right? And that's sort of the cool part. It's like figuring out your niche, figuring out what makes you different.
I don't remember like when it came up, but maybe it was in the workshop. You're like, you're very bold in the things that you do and say. And I was like, who, me?
Yeah.
But then interestingly, around the same time, I had more people saying that to me. And so I think it's just like your business shifts over time. I shift over time. The mission that I have for the business shifts. And so I think sometimes it's good, probably every couple of years, right, to go through and update the messaging.
Yep.
Maybe not full rebrand, but just updating the way that you're presenting yourself to be more aligned. We
ended up calling that workshop the Clarity in Your Message workshop because the whole goal was clarity. And I think when you have clarity, what I see from you, what I see from some other clients that you and I know in common, it's almost like you become a trailblazer now, because it's almost like you've given yourself permission to be this person that you kind of knew you were, but hadn't taken the time to really define. And then you're innovating at that point. Right. And so that's where it's really fun for me to sit back and be like the proud mama, marketing mama over here, is like, look at them go. They're taking their messaging and their branding and they're just killing it. Right. And that's sort of the treat for us, is just being able to see people feel seen and feel like they're, again, in alignment. And that word's going to come up a lot.
I just recorded yesterday another podcast episode about shame. One of the things that I said in that episode was about how you have to be able to own your story, the story that all of us have in our background, because we all have a story we could share that will impact other people. And then I feel like the way that our, messaging and branding was not like fully displaying that. And I just wonder, when I had done that last branding, it's not that it was bad or not aligned with where I was, but I mean, it was a full 2-3 years prior. I think I just hadn't even owned up to my full vision, like the full version of myself, right? To be fully seen. And so I just think it's really interesting, like how to see it evolve over time. Yeah. So thanks for pulling that out.
Yeah, girl, it's an absolute delight for me. And I mean, it takes time too, right, Sarah? Like you have to get enough reps under your belt to know what you're good at, what you're not positioned to do best, right? What you'd rather somebody else do. And I always joke around, like we typically don't work with businesses that are under 3 years old because they're figuring out who they are, right? There's a bit of an identity crisis happening, and that's perfectly normal. And that's exactly how it should be from what I've seen over the years.
Something you said a couple minutes ago, which I totally agree with, is around people wanting to put all this time and money into their logo and the colors and like all of the fun stuff, like you said. But I feel like it's a really good example, like, those things that people do where they like feel like they're busy and they feel like they're making progress, but they're not actually doing the things that they need to do. Sort of high level synopsis. I know that it would take hours to go through every piece of it, but like, how can someone understand, like get clear on what that message is in the first place?
I mean, I think to get clarity on that, it's first understanding even what messaging is. Messaging is a mechanism through which we develop a curated list of words that really capture your vibe. Once we go through the various exercises to define that on all levels, let me define your vibe at a values level. Let me define your vibe in your industry. How do you compare and contrast in your industry. Define and curate a list of words that tell the story of your client really well. From there, building out that strategy, that really messaging marketing strategy is sort of like that fourth component that creates a really holistic picture of how to define yourself. There's two goals to messaging. One is everybody behind the scenes, the back of the house team needs to be on board, right? And you can feel it pretty quickly when you hire somebody who just doesn't capture the vision or is against the vision. And I know you and I have jammed on this offline where it's like, Lord help me, why did I do this? And then we forget the other side of the component here, which is we need to make sure we're capturing the attention of the people you're trying to get attention from. I was thinking about this. I'm really into working out. I know you are, lifting weights. The person who purchases First Form protein powders is not the same person that purchases Arbonne protein powders. I actually really like both at a flavor level, but they serve very different purposes in my life, in my head. Like this is the protein powder I give my children because I know it's like super crunchy and it's got all these healthy pea product stuff. This is the protein powder that gives me gains. And I'm not sitting here reading the ingredient list.
Right.
I probably should be, but they've done such a good job of defining their brands that I don't have to think that hard. And you and I have talked about this and we say this in our workshops. If your consumer, if your customer is having to spend mental calories trying to figure you out, you've already lost. We need to define your vibe and then forge forward with that in a way that's in alignment everywhere. And that's when we get into the consistency conversation, from website to your social to your print, copywriting that goes out, even how you communicate via email with clients. It needs to be in alignment because it's an experience. People work with you because they like you, because you've done something well behind the camera, on your discovery calls, in person at a networking event to say, oh, I'm intrigued, I'm leaning in. So once they've leaned in, we need to close that deal, right? And then, But we also have to continue that client experience to keep them around beyond 3, 4, 5 months.
Something that I tell coaching clients to do, obviously not Young & Co clients because we don't do marketing for them. But one of the things I think in general, people need to have more conversations with people. And I know the standard advice when you're starting a business or starting a new offer is to send out a survey and have more coffee chats with people and sort of like try to understand what they want. But I think those to me are never really super helpful. But I do think that just having more conversations with more people who are your target client, whether that is through sales calls or giving them like some sort of free consult or in the DMs on Instagram, I have conversations all the time. And this is one of the ways that I think I was able to grow Young & Co as fast as I did, is I started using their words that they were saying to describe what they want, kind of talking to them about what their goals are and then reframing from what I think their goals are to what the words that actually came out of their mouth. Because if one person's saying it, it's likely that more people think the same thing.
100%.
What is the easiest way for somebody who can't come hire a Kathy to pull all of the most amazing words out of their brain? Is that the easiest way to create your messaging?
So it's absolutely the best way to create your storytelling, which is part of your messaging. I think discovery calls are the most valuable way to quickly get what you need to figure out if it's the right client for you to serve. But then to your point, are they saying the same things that I know that my best clients? And so I think sometimes it's identify maybe, and assuming you've had some clients, even if you're pretty new into business, you know who you've liked working with. And so I would spend a little time figuring out what is it about these 2 or 3 clients that was really enjoyable for me? What was it about the relationship, the process that just made this a client that I want to replicate over and over again? 2, one question that I love asking on discovering calls, if they're looking for a retainer situation or whatever service they're looking for, is, have you hired somebody for this before? What worked really well? What didn't work really well? I want to understand, to make sure that, and it really comes from a place of service. Most people won't waste a single second telling you all the things that they like. And I know you know this in your industry. My gosh, I'm sure you hear an earful every time, tax season ends and they start coming to you. It's a lot. And so it quickly helps you understand the CEO or the decision maker's pain points, right? In my industry, communication. I mean, the bar is so low sometimes, guys. Like, they're not responding to my emails. What?
Yeah. Well, that's the same thing that people say to us too, right? Is just not responding to emails. And so that's why I'm like, with my team, I'm like, we need to respond to emails because it's an easy thing to check the box. But I do the same thing in my intake forms. I say, if we're talking about Young & Co stuff, like I say, what are you doing in terms of accounting and bookkeeping? What's working well, what's not? And people don't waste any time telling me all the things that drive them up the wall.
And then I think, then taking that a step further, again, bringing it back to messaging. Messaging is all about the storytelling. Let's take this like thing that's really obnoxious for your clients over and over and over again. And then let's flip it into a you deserve statement. And then that's where like your magic sauce gets sprinkled in. Like it's just plain wrong. And I know you know this. It's just plain wrong that your contractor isn't responding to your emails in a timely fashion. It's almost like you're trying to find the heartstrings that are going to tug at that person being consistent, that they're like, yes, they get it. And I think, again, it goes back to you being in alignment, but your client feeling seen in what you're putting out there. We always make sure that your client, your target audience is the hero of the storytelling, right? And so we tell them about themselves in a way that they can self-identify, self-qualify. And then from there, just say, Sarah gets it. The Young & Co team gets it. I mean, they're saying all the right things. I mean, that's how my business coach landed me as a client. She said the same thing enough times that I was like, she gets it. And so I think that's the repetition, the consistency is a part of that.
Something that comes up for me as you're saying that is making sure that you follow through on the things that you say. To me, and we've talked about this too, I've done podcast episodes about you grow your business, you grow your team, you're trying to teach, the standards for the way that you deliver your service. And I think that I literally just yesterday was doing a coaching call with somebody who was wanting to upgrade their offer, increase their pricing. And she was like, but what if I can't deliver on what I'm promising? And that's a whole other thing. We could go down a rabbit hole, but I think that it all ties back in because you're not going to be able to share your message out there, or you're going to share a watered down version of it that doesn't draw in your ideal client if you have those doubts floating back there in your mind, right?
I mean, being an entrepreneur is so tough, right, Sarah? Like it's one of those things. I was recently doing some engagement on LinkedIn, and someone posted something about exactly what you're saying, the imposter syndrome and things like that. I don't like the phrase "fake it till you make it." That was something I heard a lot years ago. I think it's really innovate till you make it, right? I think sometimes that lack of there's fear, right? So in your client's case, it might just be like it's scary leveling up, elevating your game is scary, and I mean I think we can all agree to that and resonate with how she feels. But then the other half of that is like, as you continue iterating, innovating, it's again, you find like where you are a rock star, right? And so the same is true for me, right? We started as a video production company. I love video production. I don't love the lifestyle of video production. Yeah. I was on the road a lot. It's very long days. It's exhausting, to be on your feet all day, tapping into emotions constantly, and then directing a team and lights. I mean, it's a fun lifestyle. We still offer it because I love it. It's legacy work for me. But now I get to do it in more of a controlled setting. Over the years, I was like, well, I mean, I'm a great writer. What can I do now? And then I remember my first client outside of video production was the boxing gym that I was working at. And at that time, websites were like not really what they are today. And I'm like, can I help you fix this up? Can I do your social media? And then my next client after that was a mom that had just beat cancer that started her own blog, and blogs were just coming out, and she knew what she wanted to say, but she didn't identify as a strong writer. So she and I would meet for coffee, and I would interview her, and then I'd write her blog post for her. Right. And then I just kept iterating. I mean, that I think back to those contracts that I first took, and I mean, I basically worked for free. I mean, I paid them essentially to let me work for them. It was just crazy. And now, I mean, I could have never imagined this 11 years ago. It's crazy, but it's just because I was willing to continue showing up and lick my wounds on the days that I took some blows. And it's not easy being an entrepreneur, but I think if you are just steadfast in your commitment to building your dream or living, in our case, I know that you and I share in common, we want the freedom of being able to do it on our terms and being able to help people in the process. So I get it. I can definitely resonate. And just my story is one of innovating. And when things start feeling gross, you're like, what is it that's not feeling right? It's time to change it again.
No, that's good. That's really great advice. Thanks for sharing that. People on my Instagram asked a couple questions around this idea of leveling up. Incidentally, what people are going to hear me talk about, the episodes after this are going to be around, leveling up your offers and selling higher ticket and all of that. So some of the questions we had were around how can we level up our offers to sell to a client who's going to pay 2 times, 3 times or more what we're used to selling. And then another question was around how do we do that without feeling spammy?
I think when you're new, so I mean, so like some basic, this is like both positioning and also just business, I would say advice is I know when most people start, they approach it as an a la carte service. There's too many options on the menu. You are literally the Cheesecake Factory of whatever industry you're in. And it's overwhelming. I'm having to consume too many calories to figure out how to work with you. And so I think an easy way is curating some packages that allow you to do the depth of the work to deliver the impact that they want to see. Right. And so I know in the beginning, again, thinking back to a newer entrepreneur, sometimes there's a little bit of fear of like, will they pay this price? Am I overreaching? Like maybe I just do this one thing and make them happy and maybe they'll grow. Most entrepreneurs get really frustrated when they just can't do the depth of the work they know is required to do good work. And so I would say one would be curate some awesome packages, not 12, not even 10, maybe not even 5. There's probably only like a need initially for 3.
I say 3.
3, maybe
1 or 3.
4, like it's just too many options dilute your impact. From a messaging and branding standpoint, keep it really simple and always focused on the benefits of working with you. Oh, we have a cat.
There's a cat. I didn't even know she was in here. Sorry.
Awesome. This is the wild, wild west of podcasts today. And so simplicity, I would say, is actually what elevates your game. If you're newer or if you're not quite sure how you fit in, keep your color palette simple, keep your font hierarchy simple, keep your bank of words that work really well for you pretty simple. The simplicity is actually really attractive, and I think it's hard to do. I see competitors in my industry that some of them are no longer in business where they were cheapening their brand because I think they were just trying to figure out how to get new clients. Every month it was like there was a new program and there was like a new service and a new name. And I was confused as a competitor watching. I couldn't figure out the strategy behind it. That consistency piece is really important till kingdom come. It's one of those things that's evergreen and it won't change. You need to stay consistent. And if you're going to pivot, have a whole pivot you're doing and then go down that track for a while so people can catch on, because it'll take time to catch on to what you're doing.
For the Young & Co. offers, we didn't necessarily change the offers, but I remember that being, for me, I wanted to make sure it wasn't super confusing what we were doing. That came out of our messaging workshop. I was like, how can we share these in a way that's easy? And you were just like, oh, you're going to do these 3 tiers and they're going to be called this and it's going to be super. I'm just like, how do you even come up with these things? I don't know.
And it came straight from your value session. We went back to your values. What are the things that are really important to you? And then let's put them out as offers and make it tiered so that it makes sense. And I mean, that was an awesome moment. I remember that. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Let's say somebody wants to upgrade. If we take me, Sarah, from years ago when I was just doing bookkeeping, ad hoc, hourly type work, to a package where somebody's paying us multiple 5 figures up to 6 figures a year in a higher level service, what messaging needs to shift or what branding needs to shift in order for me to come off as somebody who can, or for my business to come off as a business that can do that higher level of work and the results that come with that?
Once you get past the feast or famine phase of business where you take on every single project because there's just dollars that have to come in the door, when you get to a place where you're somewhat stabilized and you're trying to figure out how to up level, I would say you got to figure out what the boundaries are now. And so again, that goes back to those repetitions of what am I good at? What didn't work well with this project? Curate those packages that we just talked about, right? And then be relentlessly committed to sticking to what you made your strategy. I have had 7-figure, very established CEOs in my workshops that couldn't communicate a minimum price tag for working with them. Well, I mean, if it's a grand, I'll do it. I mean, it's a project, but then there's this $600,000 project over here, and it was mind-boggling to me, right? And we would sit in that tension in that workshop until the point was made. Now, whether or not they change, that's beyond my scope of work. But sort of in the same vein, I have a friend right now that she owns a business here in the DMV, and she can't find an architect to take on her project because it's too small for her studio. And so she's kind of like SOSing, like, do you guys know any architects that would take on a project of this size? That's good messaging and branding and commitment to growing, right? And so I think figuring out that is a really important part of the conversation. When it comes to the messaging, you won't find a single Fortune 500 company that doesn't have a really clear vision as to where they're going. In that mission vision work is the values. And so again, even if it's just you for now, there's values you have. There's things that you stand by that you will and won't do. And I would say like turn off all the noise from the outside world, right? I think it's really easy in social media to see all the things that you think you should be saying to fit in, but the goal is not to fit in. The word polarizing has different connotations, but my goal in my clients' marketing is not to make you likable. I actually want to define who likes you as quickly as possible so that I can repel the rest of the audience and stop wasting my time. I don't go by vanity metrics. That means literally nothing to me because I've seen and managed accounts where they come to me with 30, 40, 50 grand audience and maybe 2 people are liking their posts. Like how they got this audience, I don't know. But my goal is actually to get rid of as much of the fake followers here so that we can really talk to who we're talking to, right? So be okay being bold, maybe being a little spicy if that's your brand, or at least communicating from an education component as to like why you do the things you do, how you do it, and why it's a benefit to your audience.
That's so interesting to me, the example of a 7-figure business owner who would have just such a lack of clarity in who their ideal client is, who they want to bring in, the offers they want to do. Like to me, what I see from the finance side and then like the business coaching mentor side is I feel like those are the businesses that reach a point at some point, whether it's soon or in like a few years down the road, but they end up being burned out because they can't bring clients in consistently. Somehow they get to the size, right? But it's hard for them to stay there because you're not clear on your messaging and who your client is. You can't bring in leads consistently, which makes your cash flow go all over the place. And they've usually got teams that cost them a lot of money. They start stressing about cash flow. And then these are the ones who end up burning it to the ground.
Yeah.
All because their messaging was bad.
And it's so funny because you think about messaging as just the words, but messaging also impacts process. It was kind of a moment of having to confront himself in this workshop where we had spent all this time on session 4, which is all the marketing strategy. And from his own mouth and from his team's metrics, that there was 7 of them in there, pooling data. There's outliers, as we all have outliers, right? And so we had spent this whole front half of the session, him really clearly debating, spelling out, deciding on what their ideal client looked like. And when we got to the proven process part of that section, well, I mean, it's impossible for me to do that. It just depends on the project. And it's one of those things where you kind of like sit there and go, yeah, I know, that's part of the problem. How can we possibly spell out what for what your client can expect on your website, right? The client experience. Here's what happens in the first 3 to 6 months of you working with us. There's always ranges, right? But it was an unwillingness to commit. That is a red flag. And I mean, even sharing my stuff here, Sarah and I work together. She works with OES Communications, and you kind of called out some profitability issues, right? And there's now a package that I no longer offer. I think sometimes you get in the weeds of doing what you've done, whether it's messaging or marketing or just doing the work of whatever it is you do, that sometimes you forget to zoom out and be like, is this working anymore? And so now I'm like, I don't offer this package. And we have a few legacy clients that we're honoring because they've been with us for a long time, but it's gone, right? And it feels great because now my team is being utilized in a different capacity. And the conversation is actually the same. It's just 2 different industries.
It's so crazy to me. I think all of that really comes from scarcity. I think it goes back to like the fear of repelling people. When we start our businesses, we all do this. We all try to be as cheap as we can and do as much as we can and provide tons of value because we need to prove ourselves. But then you don't stop. Right? You just keep going and you keep doing more and more. And then, people are afraid, I think, to really scale back and like focus on that one client or niche or specialty or like process, whatever it is. So I think it's interesting to hear how it comes up in all different.
You've got to elevate your community too, right? Like that's like the final piece of the straw. Every time I've hit a ceiling, I'm like, all right, it's time to like up my community, and you don't forget who you're friends with, right? But you hire the business coach, you join the retreats because it all starts in your mind. You will accomplish what you believe you're capable of. And that can be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on what the ceiling is for you.
No, I agree. Like, I think finding the next level of people who will expand you. I still have friends who I met when I was new in my business, but we're in a very different place in our businesses. And honestly, there are times when I have this thought pop up in my head of what is that person going to think about me if I do this or don't do this. And I'm like, no, my business is not for them.
Mm-hmm.
It's for me and my team. It's to support all of us and our clients, right? To do a good job for them. And that's what's most important. But it's really easy to let those things come up and try to take you back to where you used to be. And that's just not what we want to do.
Well, you're such a great example, Sarah. And I know complimenting you is probably making you cringe so hard right now, but you're such a great example of like trailblazing and just like innovating. And it's really fun to watch on the other side of the screen. You're definitely high up there and people that inspire others.
Well, I appreciate that. And I think you're amazing too. As you're like saying it makes me cringe, I'm like, let's move on. It's just something else.
I know. I'll stop there.
Is your love language words of affirmation?
Sure is.
I remember we talked about this.
My poor husband, he could like build the whole house for me. And I'd be like, but did you tell me you loved me today? And he's like,
yeah. That's so funny. My husband's that way too. And I'm just like, that's not it. Any final words of wisdom that we didn't talk about?
I think story is the strongest and fastest way to compel a human to do anything. Stay away from the facts, stay away from the features, tell all parts of the story, the good parts, the ugly parts, the things that you might think don't fit in. Really early on in my career, I went to a workshop and there was like a mentoring, like quick sessions, right? And I got paired with this older gentleman with very successful company and many millions of dollars worth. And I remember talking to him and he told me really quickly, listen, nobody cares about your personal life. No one cares that you're mom. No one. I was a brand new mom. I was a fairly new military wife at the time. And when you're young and impressionable, you might actually believe that, right? Fast forward all these years, I tell my story pretty openly, the highs and lows of both like marriage, business, growing our family, right? And that is intentional. I want to attract people who value what I value. And if that's not right for them, then it's not right for me. Starting a business and learning what to share and what not to share can be really confusing. So tell good stories and tell it all and tell it boldly.
No, I completely agree. That's something that I keep trying to do more and more of. The more I'm in business, is just sharing more of the behind the scenes, even the things I think nobody's going to want to hear about. I posted about the book I was reading on my flight the other day, and I got so many DMs about like the book that I'm reading. And I'm just like,
we have this formula that we use internally. We say clarity plus consistency creates connection. Because if I can get the connection piece, then that's when you hand it off to sales, right? I've created these connections now. It's time for you to close these deals. And that's really my goal. It's like, if I can get connections, I'm going to leave you with one final story that just came to mind as you're sharing that. Years ago, I mean, I'm talking 7, 8, 9 years ago, we had this gym owner. She was incredible. She was a resilient woman. She was like muscle from head to toe. I mean, total goal. She had 4 kids already. I mean, it was wild how fit she was. And in one of our meetings, she confided that she had struggled through all of her 20s with an eating disorder. And I looked at her and I said, you haven't talked about that once anywhere. Don't you think that'll help people? Don't you think that there's women that are struggling with that in your gym, that you could be a source of hope and encouragement and education? She wasn't willing to go there. You can't force the client, right? And that tells you the level of work that maybe she still needed to do to be able to share that, right? That's a really vulnerable thing to share. But all that to say, I mean, I think that would have just elevated her audience to a whole nother level where she could have really become a pillar of hope for a lot of people in her community. We all have ugly parts to our story. Eventually, we get to use those for good.
No, I completely agree. That's why I said earlier, it brings up the topic that I was talking about on another episode about shame. It's hard, I think, as we elevate our businesses, we become more of a leader. We have to be more visible, and you almost are just like standing up, showing everybody, here's what's under the dress, basically, knowing that not everybody's going to be accepting of that. And like, sometimes people just aren't ready, but it took me a few years to be able to share all of the things that I share about my past without breaking down and just crying in front of everybody. So for anybody listening, just know it does take work, but I think the more that you talk about it, the more that you'll start to see people resonating with it. And that for me spurs me to go on, because every time I share my story about my relationship and my debt and all of that, I get more and more people who say, I have been in a relationship like that, or I'm currently there, or I currently struggle with money in this way, and you're helping me to see there's a path out of it. And like, that's exactly what we want more of.
Yeah. And then the icing on the cake is when you can work with those clients and they like come to you and they're like, hey, I have all the same things and now I'm where I am. And how do we make this 2.0, and you're like, "Ugh, this is literally my dream come true,"
Yes.
because you just get each other. And so that's a perfect way to almost like wrap this up in a nice bow. You have found your audience, you found your people because you share and you tell good
Yep.
stories. And then from there, you get to now do what you get to do professionally.
So good. You have so many gems. Where can people find you and connect with you?
Yeah, well, we have our website, ohyescommunications.com. I'm most active on LinkedIn and Instagram. So, Oh Yes Kathy, or just Kathy Dixon. You'll see me on there. It's pretty much the same everywhere.
And Kathy has your messaging workshop is amazing, but I know those are pretty limited.
It's so fun. It's a full day immersive experience. Our team, your team, dig into all the parts of your soul. Sarah can confirm, but it's pure magic, like what comes out of that. And then it really, whether we continue working together, it's a one-time project. Either way, it's going to be an awesome experience.
All right. Well, thanks for your time. Thanks for sharing everything. And I hope everybody listening enjoyed this. We'll see you back next time.